So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay. And today we have another one of the battles from Spirit of Thunder, who has been making these recreations of battles that happened in real life history, but through the lens of Middle-earth and in Third Age Reforged. And all of the ones so far have been quite enjoyable to behold, to be honest with you, not only because they have that sort of real life history twist, but also because, generally speaking, you know, custom scenarios like this always seem to have a bit of craft to them, to the point where there's obviously a little bit more going on than just two armies slamming into one another. There's been a little bit of thought put into it. And this is going to be no exception, albeit this is probably actually the most simplistic of all of the battles that we have seen so far, to be honest, because we have got a more standard field battle, I would say, but there are still defensive opportunities, I would say, for both sides, with little positions that either one can take up. But this is the Battle of Farlasus. I'm pretty sure I'm saying that wrong, but then antiquity, sort of Latin and ancient Greek, as I've shown in the last few days, I'm not particularly good at pronouncing that sort of thing. But regardless, this is going to be between the Caesareans, who are represented by Numenor, and the Pompeians, who are represented over there by Umbar. So, you know, two factions within the Italian peninsula, so it does sort of make sense, I suppose, within antiquity terms, that both of them are sort of more heavy-duty factions, certainly from a sort of Roman perspective. So far, all of them have used Numenor, so I think it's safe to say we know who Spirit of Thunder's favourite faction is, if nothing else. But Umbar, of course, have got a lot of the same sort of things. Of all the factions in the game, these two are almost certainly the most similar, really, so no one's really going to have an extreme faction advantage one way or the other. They both have their individual little quirks, of course, with Umbar being a bit better in a skirmish, Numenor having a few more options where it comes to their really higher end stuff. In particular, some of their bodyguard tier units are a little bit stronger than those of Umbar's. But even so, interesting to see what this is going to be like. Now, the only real rules that are going to come into effect here, one is of course going to be that there are certain rules of engagement, so certain sort of unit groups such as the cavalry and the like will only be allowed to commit a little bit later on. So, you know, again, if we see certain units unmoving and then they move later on, that'll be the reason why. So different sections of the army will be moving at different times. But also, I believe, I can't actually remember which way round it is actually, which is a little bit unfortunate. But I believe it's if the Pompeians manage to eliminate 85% of the Caesareans, they win a minor victory. But other than that, the rules of engagement and the terms of victory are pretty clear. You just have to win the battle by scouring your opponent from the field. So, we shall start off with the Caesarean side of things with Numenor, starting off with Lango. So, Alcarondas Legion on the front line, so they're sort of meant to be the representation of the Praetorian Guard. The Alcarondas Legion, I mean, this does obviously lean into the fact that we have two factions in real life history who are reasonably close to one another in terms of geographical position and culture, so we're going to be seeing similar philosophies going up against one another, and of course in some cases exactly the same unit, albeit this Alcarondas Legion unit of course has got the colours of Numenor, which I quite like, to be honest. I do prefer the Umbar colours with that burgundy, but it's nice to see a different take on them. We have the Javelin Men as well. The Pila will be thrown. Seafarers of Nindamos, they may not be the really overly powerful unit that they once were at range because of the damage they could do, but they're still very effective, to be honest. Their damage is still very useful, and the fact that they can then back up any other infantry and melee to a decent extent when they pull out their axes is also a very nice thing as well. Numenorian cohort in behind, of course, the genuine Numenorian heavy infantry unit, which, again, there's going to be no complaints when you use the Numenorian cohort. Very damaging for what they are as well. This is really where Numenor shine. A lot of their units, like line infantry, their spears, they're all capable of chucking out a little bit more damage than their equivalents from most other factions, which is what really gives them an edge when it comes to being really aggressive and getting up close and personal as quickly as possible. Some Belagair archers. This is really the one tool that Numenor can have against Umbar to sort of contest the skirmish fights. Of course, both factions have them, but if we're going to see units like the Balakith marksmen on the field today and the Narinaaru Royal Guard in numbers for what will be the Pompeians, then Numenor will struggle in that. They're definitely not as easy to set up to win a long skirmish fight as Umbar are, but then Umbar are one of the best in the game at that. Numenorian Shield Guard, AP Spears, Elite AP Spears at that. Very similar to the Citadel Guard from Gondor. Got some Alcarondas Faithful back here. Once again, a unit which actually Numenor don't have access to anymore, but they do for the purposes of this, and they still have that colour scheme. Some Anarion Royal Guard at the back for Lango as well, and I would imagine it's going to be very similar along the line. We have Mevin, who's got some steel bows. AP archers, this is really the one thing that Umbar don't have in their repertoire when it comes to their archer line. But in terms of sort of grinding an archer fight out, they're not actually the most useful unit to have because they don't have that much ammunition, and you really want to be using AP arrows on targets that aren't basic archers if you can help it. So the steel bows are a kind of interesting unit. You have to know when to use them to get the most out of them, because if you do waste their arrows, like, they're decent in melee but definitely not worth the cost if you can't get some value from their AP arrows first and foremost. Got a ballista back here, classic Roman weapon of course. We've got another unit of Anarion Royal Guard. Yeah, his army looks very, very similar. Seafarers, an Alcarondas Legion, Numenorian cohort backing them up with some archers. A little bit of water here. We've got some... Wait a minute. So that's Alcarondas Legion is playing as Numenor. That's quite confusing. Seems like the sort of thing that blindness would do, but I'm not going to accuse him of it without knowing for sure. Alcarondas Legion, however, Seafarers of Nindamos. Anarion Royal Guard are over here as well. Got some Numenorian steel bows. Yeah, very, very similar all across the board, to be honest with you. More of Mevin's units in behind, more of Alcarondas Legion's units up front. Mevin is over here. We've got some bodyguard tier units, of course. As I said, Numenor very, very strong in this regard. The Royal Legion of Armenelos. Only really dwarven line infantry bodyguards are stronger than the Royal Legion of Armenelos. Of course, the elves don't really have equivalent units like that anymore, since the Gwythian Myrdain became more of a shock infantry focus. There's really nothing among the elves which sort of meets that criteria anymore. So it's only really the dwarves and the Numenorians that contest that battle. Seafarers of Nindamos, again with Alcarondas Legion on the front line, so again very similar things. Marshal of the Gar is the final army, of course, which is Spirit of Thunder. He's got some Anarion Sentinels hiding, some Shield Guard hiding, some more Shield Guard over here. He's got a bit of cavalry, but I mean, he's going to be outnumbered in terms of cavalry, I believe. He's got some Numenorian Vanguard, who of course are pretty decent spear cavalry units. A little bit expensive perhaps for what they offer, but I think that's more of an issue with perhaps the bodyguard cavalry being a little bit overly powerful still, in relation to some of the single HP cavalry, but still. Lots of Numenorian Vanguard, which should be able to put up a decent fight. Moving over to the Pompeian side of things, we can see in wedge formation here, which is a bit of a rarity to be honest. Engsvitz has got a lot of Adunheim Lancers. They actually won't trade all that well with Numenorian Vanguard, to be honest with you. But in the numbers they're in, I would imagine they should be okay actually, just in behind them. However, just before we move on, we do have some Corsairs, some Corsair infantry as well. So just some lower tier units, which, you know, they're not going to do much, to be honest with you, against the Numenor force that they're facing off against, but it's better than nothing. A huge amount of cavalry, which, based on the amount of cavalry they have, based on how much of their army that it takes up, you would have to say that Umbar's chances of victory here are pretty reliant on Engsvitz utilising this cavalry to full effect. So he's going to be the key player on the battlefield today, I think. Adunheim Lancers are here, lots of Adunheim Lancers. Again, just through sheer numbers, they'll beat the Numenorian Vanguard here, but it still won't be as efficient as maybe they're hoping for. Adunheim Lancers. I do hope that Umbar have got at least one bodyguard tier unit of cavalry, otherwise it's a... yeah, I think there's just Adunheim Lancers, isn't it? I would have liked to have seen, to be honest with you, a unit of Warlords, just to really give them a bit of extra punch in their cat force, because they're going to be so dependent on this force really doing the heavy lifting for them on this occasion. And having a unit of Knights can really help with that. Just having Adunheim Lancers is all well and good, but again, they're not the world beaters that the Warlords are. Corsairs, Corsair infantry back here as well. Also, Alcarondas Faithful on the side of Numenor as well. So I do think that, you know, maybe a bit more for Umbar's cavalry is needed here, but we'll see. They could be just fine in this battle. We'll have to wait. Mr. Sneakman has got some Balagaya footmen just in behind over here. Got some ballista crew. A couple of units of ballista actually. We've got some Anarion Royal Guard up here on the hill. Some more Anarion Royal Guard from Engsvitz, albeit he's going to have his hands full really dealing with other aspects of his army. Balagaya footmen, Balagaya archers, lots of Umbar Alcarondas Legion with blackguards on the front line. The blackguards, you know, they tend to be a little bit more awkward to use than the Seafarers of Nindamos, but they are more or less the same kind of unit. Balagaya footmen, Corsairs, Corsair savages, which of course are AP, but the quality is in question here. Balagaya archers. Got some Balakith shield bearers in there as well for a bit of extra AP, but it's not exactly the Balakith axe guard, which would have been a little bit stronger. Got some Alcarondas Faithful up on the hill, so they do have a unit of higher tier cavalry, but it's way over here. Anarion Royal Guard, some Balagaya archers and some Adunheim shield guard. Way back over there, there's also some more Anarion Royal Guard. I would imagine here The Umbar are probably going to be on the defence, just based on the relative strength of the... well, just based on the content of both armies. If Umbar are expected to be the ones to charge forward, a lot of these Corsairs are going to bounce right off of a Numenor front line. Whereas if Umbar are allowed to dig in, they can find their use, and they can also try and use that cav to their advantage. But we shall see. Without further ado, let's begin. And there is of course going to be quite a bit of shuffling around to start with, but yeah, I would say if the onus is on Umbar to be the ones to attack, they're set up to fail here, to be honest with you, because their cavalry isn't really going to be able to get in and around all of this stuff over here. The Numenor cavalry is of course going to be able to get in the way reasonably effectively, and there's also pikes and stuff hidden over here ready to just muck up any sort of Umbar flank that they may try and do. But also just the fact that the infantry quality here, like Numenor have got more at their disposal on the front line here. Alcarondas, like normally Umbar can rely on quality to bridge the gap in a situation like this of stuff like the Alcarondas Legion, but on this occasion they're up against another faction which can do that very well. But not only that, they're up against exactly the same kind of unit that they usually have all to themselves. So it is going to be quite interesting here to see how both sides deal with this, but it does look as though both sides are going to move amicably into the middle to meet on the open field, which does at the very least offer Umbar a fair shake of things here in the middle. But like I said, it's all going to come down to that cavalry. It's going to be difficult to use the cavalry, all of it, for Engsvitz though, and like I said, Marshal of the Gar is over there and he's waiting there with pikes hidden in the trees, so I do hope that Engsvitz has his eye on the ball there. But for the time being, we're going to see a fight on the front line, which I think is going to be very bloody for both sides, albeit the Seafarers of Nindamos can get into position here and potentially get the first volley of javelins off, which could be a really nice leg up here for the Caesareans as they get their armies into place. Things... a tense standoff here. Both sides just waiting. Again, very much the calm before the storm here. Numenor are a very good looking faction. I especially like the new helmet redesign on the Seafarers of Nindamos. They get their javelins into position. Are they going to fire? It doesn't look like it. They're just sort of holding their ground and waiting. Again, if this is the plan, if like javelins and such are going to be throwing back and forth at one another, a lot of it could very well come down to just who gives the attack order first. So if there is a point where both of these factions are then allowed to suddenly loose their payloads, it could be just a matter of who is allowed, well, who reacts quickly or more quickly to the rules saying that you can now finally attack. Now cavalry of course is waiting. That will be upon us later on in the battle. You can see the defence already set up on the flank. And this is going to be fairly brutal. I mean, there is a lot of Alcarondas Legion for Umbar, but obviously when you see just individual stuff like the Royal Legion, that'll be enough to tip the balance somewhere. Like I said, I do think that the Seafarers are just a more user-friendly unit than the Corsair Blackguards, to be honest with you. And then there's also the second line of stuff like Numenorian Cohort, whereas the second line for the Pompeians consists of Belagai Footmen and Corsairs. Yes, it's AP, but again, it's not going to be as good as the more heavy-duty units that Numenor are going to have in their second line. So it's definitely going to come down to, as I've said several times now, how well Umbar can use their cavalry, because I do think if it just comes down to a slogfest on the front line, I would back Numenor. More units moving forward. Belagai archers. There's also the Alcarondas Faithful, which, I mean, if the panic button is hit, the Alcarondas Faithful can also be the sort of thing which helps to stop that huge tide of Black Numenorian cavalry, which is going to be arriving on the scene at some stage. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I think it's going to, around the 10,000 frame mark is when we're going to see the battle truly get underway. But this is still valuable because we're seeing the armies position themselves, and even though sort of the rules state you can't engage with one another, even in situations like this you can always see players start to manoeuvre into a position where they can get sort of good shots or try and position their front line such that it's going to be a good shape to engage. And And you can see here already Mevin is moving his archers into a position. He's sort of getting them in and amongst the Anarion guards. So he's going to have a huge firing blob back here. What's he going to go after, though, would be my question. What would be the best target? I mean, certainly I think the best target to go after, they're not the strongest unit that Umbar have, but these lads over here, the Corsair Savages, so easy to shoot, easy to kill, and they are reasonably dangerous to some of Numenor's units because they do have big AP values being a heavy axe unit. But also just any arrow that's going to hit them, you're going to be guaranteed a kill, really, especially from some of Numenor's stronger archers. So you may as well go after them. You'll really start to cut down on Umbar's second line if you're able to do that. And of course then, it just heightens the importance of the Umbar cavalry. Interesting to see what the artillery does as well, because the artillery is so far away. Maybe, well, I mean the Numenor artillery, to be fair, is probably a little bit closer. I mean, yeah, it is closer, so I mean the Numenor artillery could be even more useful. I'm not sure if those ballistae are in range or not. Definitely going to be cutting it pretty close, and even if they are, to be honest with you, both ballistas are going to have to be really careful not to just shoot into the backs of their own men. Both of these factions, of course, Alisan is actually another Umbar player. I almost completely missed that there was a third Umbar player, but here he is. But like I was saying, these are two factions which aren't really going to have too many issues when it comes to morale, but when you're getting hit in the back by flaming artillery, even the strongest of wills in this game can start to falter. You don't see any of the stuff like the Adunheim Shield Guard on the front line, your black Numenorian units which have a locked morale, for either side actually, interestingly enough. So both of them are fallible. Just keeping an eye out now. It is going to be a pretty large engagement, a long, nasty line engagement for both sides. And then this is going to be the chaotic portion of the battlefield, certainly. It's going to be interesting to see who gets the first volley off. You can see the Corsair Blackguards are waiting. They've got sort of like the old style of helm that the seafarers used to have, with the sort of slight fins on the side. Whereas the Numenorians have got the wings, which are more reminiscent of any Numenorian inheritor faction. I think we are now heading into the start of the battle proper. Bit more movement in behind there from Umbar. Probably going to start to see javelins get traded back and forth any second now. At least I would certainly hope so. I mean, there's no real need anymore to continue to manoeuvre around, to be honest with you. Everything is in place. I'm not really sure what the delay is all about here. Very strange indeed, very peculiar. But still, nothing. Thought we were here for a battle today. Coming out to a field in the blazing hot sun, because this doesn't look like the doesn't seem like it'd be the most comfortable of experiences if you would come out here in at the height of summer in full armour. But still nothing. Still a little bit of movement in behind, not much else. Ballistas being wheeled forwards because they're too far away from the front line. Still, the standoff continues. We're now over 1,000 frames past the point where Spirit of Thunder told me the battle began. And both sides still don't seem to be too eager to test one another just yet. But whoever does go for the first bite of the cherry, as it were, is going to get a nasty javelin volley off on the opposing side. I mean, Umbar's front line looks thicker, but I think that is a bit of an illusion, to be honest with you. I think it's just the fact they've got a lot of their units over here especially combined and on top of one another, whereas over here they're a little bit more separated out for Lango and his boys. Look at those seafarers. They've been holding this position for a little while at this point. Their arms might be getting a little bit tired. Any second now, I'm sure. Frozen in the face of one another, both armies paralysed with fear. We've had plenty of time to admire the unit models at the very least. Ah, here we go. The first volley of javelins comes, both sides scything into one another. The Corsair Blackguards doing their thing. Obviously we're going to see some fairly significant casualties for both sides here, I would say, but like I said, a lot of it can come down to who gets the first volley off. Also, a lot of it can come down to what target you're actually going after and what position in the line you're firing at. But you can see here that both sides are really taking quite a bit of damage. But to be fair, for Numenor, most of it is seafarers. Whereas over here for Umbar, you can see that they have targeted down a section of the line made up of Alcarondas Legion, which when the melee phase gets underway, they will be the more important unit. But having said that, the less Javelin Men they have, the less DPS they're going to be able to do, so it's a choice that does have to be made. Corsair Blackguards throwing their Javies out. Neither of these two units have got the most ammunition, to be honest with you. You can see over here, this unit of Alcarondas Legion has also taken a huge amount of damage as the Corsair Blackguards continue to use their barbed javelins to devastating effect. And you can see here the Seafarers of Nindamos, well, some of them at least, have got their axes out, so ammunition expended already. You can see over here that a lot of damage was done in particular to this unit of Alcarondas Legion. Like from afar it doesn't look like much has happened at all, but upon closer inspection to the Umbar line there are quite a lot of corpses. 57 Seafarers of Nindamos continue to launch some javelins, or at least it looks as though they want to, but having second thoughts, they're sort of again frozen solid. There they go, throwing a few jabbies into the thick Umbar front line. You can also see now the Corsair Blackguards pulling out their scimitars as well, a sign which fairly soon I think means we're going to start to see the melee engagement, at least for Numenor's sake. They probably should, because the ballista bolts are starting to rain in, and when you're in a densely packed formation like this, that's when ballistas are at their very strongest. But if the two lines are close to one another, that sort of disincentivises the use of ballistas for both sides. Still they wait. A few ballista bolts coming in from the Numenor side of things as well, but none of these bolts have hit really. So far a 0% success rate for both sides' artillery. Now there's a bit of a hit there going right through again. Devastating damage it isn't, but this could make all the difference. Like I said, like that's a nice hit as well. Going to be able to kill 6 or 7 infantrymen per hit. It's going to be a difficult proposition to say that's worthwhile as an investment, but obviously in this scenario that doesn't really matter too much. As you can see, the artillery continues to crash in from both sides. In comes Umbar, and now we shall see. I mean, it's a little bit of a fractious front line, to be honest with you, as Numenor come forward. Army abilities being used, which is going to sort of restore fatigue and increase damage. I think for both of these factions, I think the ability is the same. Again, restoring fatigue, which isn't really the important thing, but it does increase the damage, which, to gain the upper hand early on in this fight, that could be absolutely vital. And Numenor did come forward in a sort of wedge-like fashion to try and make Umbar's job a little bit more difficult, sort of get them on the inside of the Crescent Moon. They're the little spoon in this battle. But to be fair, I mean, I think Numenor are going to have to commit their second line fairly quickly, to be honest with you, because I think they actually came off worse from the Javelin trading early on. Which is not good news for them, and you can see that already over here Umbar have managed to force their way along the coast a little bit, and the second line to a certain extent has had to be committed. Some Numenorian shield guard coming in. Their AP will be very useful, but they're still going up against Alcarondas Legion here. Not good news for the Caesareans at all, as the Pompeians I think have the upper hand in this battle so far. Another army ability popped. We can't see which player is doing this, of course, but ultimately throughout the course of the battle all of them will be using such things. You can see as well, yeah, like in sections where the javelins really took a heavy toll, Umbar, they are gaining the upper hand here. In other sections, Numenor are holding on a little bit more stoutly. Another javelin coming in. I think there are slightly more archers on the side of Numenor as well, interestingly enough. Maybe it's more even than that. You can see here it is a real brawl here in the middle, and it's one that Umbar will be quite happy with so far, you would have to say. Their Alcarondas Legion is still in good health. Several sections of the the Numenor front line, I should say, looking rickety at best, outright collapsing at worst. They are holding on more effectively here in the middle, And again, it's perhaps no surprise that the areas where they're holding on best are actually the areas where their seafarers have been Damos held. So it could be that actually the Corsair Blackguards going primarily after the opposing Javelin Men paid more dividends because it allowed them to keep up their DPS for longer. Whereas the seafarers, a lot of them were going after Alcarondas Legion. But in the end, it hasn't really seemed to help them all that much. You can see over here, the second line has been committed for Numenor, and the Numenorian cohorts most definitely doing their thing. But now, the cavalry rushes forward, and this is going to be key. It's all going to be down to Marshal of the Guard. Can he stop this cavalry from running roughshod over their lines? Because if he can, Umbar are going to go on to win this fight. If he can, then they should be in a pretty decent place. I mean, Numenorian Vanguard one-on-one with the Dunheim Lancers, I would back the Numenor cavalry in that fight, as I said, but a massive numbers advantage in terms of cav. I mean, there are pikes and spears over here as well, though, so Umbar do need to be a little bit careful. Maybe it's a good thing they don't have warlords in hindsight. Alcarondas Legion are routing. Royal Legion of Farlasus getting ready to charge into the front line over here, but you can see that Umbar continuing to have a real impact on this fight. Anarion Royal Guard shooting point blank into the Alcarondas Legion, but they're going to be reasonably resilient at dealing with that sort of thing. Alcarondas Faithful trying to charge in, trying to do some damage, but they are melee cavalry, so they're not going to have a devastating impact in the way that perhaps the Numenor side of things is hoping for. But to be fair, wherever their Numenorian cohort and shield guard have added themselves to the front line, they have stabilised and they are now winning. The thing is, they don't have enough to cover the whole line, so they're actually losing up there, but they have stabilised things to a large extent down here, especially over here near the coastline, where Umbar looked like they were going to break through right away. They're now running out of steam, and the time where the Corsairs and the Belagai footmen need to be committed is getting ever closer. Which again is not going to be quite on the same level as the Numenor reinforcements, but Numenor had to commit their reinforcements sooner, which is always a good sign. If you see your opponent having to commit earlier than perhaps they would like. You can see over here the Umbar cavalry in patches is getting caught by spears and by the Numenorian riders. You can see over here the Dunheim Lancers continuing to charge. They're taking the wide angle around. I think it's going to be really quite difficult to stop all of these Dunheim Lancers from getting to their intended destination. That unit of Dunheim Lancers charged headfirst into Anarion Sentinels, but when you have this much cavalry to take care of, sometimes you just need to give attack orders to all of them. Ride of the Rohirrim style and hope that they can just break through in places. You're going to take losses. There goes Marshal of the Guards General. He's in the Royal Legion of Farlasus, I believe. So yeah, he's on the front line fighting hard. One of the first men in the unit to fall actually was the General, which is most unfortunate for him. You can see there the Corsair Savages utilising their AP alongside their betters in the Alcarondas Legion. Lots of arrow support coming in. You can see now that the line fight for both sides is starting to thin out, but the Corsairs have now had to be committed, so the second line for Umbar is in effect, and I do think ultimately the quality of the second line is going to start to really come into effect now. Numenor is probably going to start to make up for some of the losses they took earlier on, which is going to place more of an emphasis on the cavalry here in the back lines. I say in the back lines, at least some cavalry has managed to get into the back lines. See there the Dunheim Lancers charging in, into the archers. Alcarondas Faithful have managed to catch up to some of the Dunheim Lancers as well, which is going to end very poorly for the Dunheim. The Ballista, again, both sides trying to use their artillery to good effect, taking pot shots at one another. But Umbar have got one more artillery piece, so that's something else they can potentially fall back on as the battle goes along, but they'll have to conserve ammunition to do that. Numenorian Vanguard charging in. They're staying in melee for perhaps a little bit too long. It's not going to end too well for them if they stay here. But it's a real slaughter on this front line. But now, with the cavalry, sort of the first wave of cavalry anyway, largely gone, Numenor is going to be able to move some of their elite pikemen to the front line, which is certainly a worry, I would say, for Umbar, because they really don't have anything of their own on this occasion, because obviously they do have the same unit in their roster, but they don't have any available to them on this occasion, so they can't really match them one for one, and we all know how effective pikes can be. Numenorian Shield Guard charging into the Belagai footmen, obviously again in terms of quality of unit, that's going to go very heavily in one direction. Once again, there's DIY sounds happening all around me. It's unfortunate. The Dunheim Lancers charging in. A lot of these cavalry units are getting into the skirmish lines back here, doing some damage, but actually I don't really think it's the skirmish lines that are doing much of the heavy lifting for either side, to be honest with you. I'd be very surprised if when we saw the end of this battle that the archers have got a ton of... there's another army ability. Maybe these Anarion Guard are okay for themselves, so they've got into a position where they're basically point blank and shooting into units, especially against stuff like Corsairs over here. Like, look at the amount of damage those Corsairs are taking from arrow fire and from a charge from that heavy Numenorian cavalry. Definitely a problem. You can also see over here ballista bolts flying in, causing some braking for Numenor. Belagaea footmen moving across to try and stop the momentum that they seem to have in the centre now. What's happening over here? We've got some Corsair infantry, got a little bit of cavalry still at the back over here. Quite a lot of the first wave of Umbar riders have been dealt with, however, without landing too many significant blows, but they have helped at the very least. There goes an Umbar general. I think Umbar are going to suffer from morale shocks a little bit more than Numenor here, purely because they have more in the way of lower end units. In comes some Belagaea pikes. Umbar do have some pikes, not as good as the Numenor ones on this occasion, but if they can still get onto the front line, that phalanx will still be useful to help shore things up, but it's a little bit too chaotic for pikes to really get set and comfortable at this stage. You can see there are a lot of gaps in the front line now as both sides have taken a real beating. But over here you can see the Numenorian cohort continuing to fight hard. Defeat seems like a certainty. There's quite a few Blackguards, a few Alcarondas legions. The addition of the AP from the Savages over here, by the looks of things, has managed to overwhelm the Numenorians. So over here near to the shore of this little lake, Umbar are going to win. Further towards the middle though, it looks as though the Numenorians have got the upper hand, albeit with more Umbar troops arriving. Perhaps the distraction here in the back lines of these Umbar riders has borne fruit after all. The Adunai Lance continuing to move this way, and it is looking as though more of them are being committed forward as we speak, or at least more Umbar troops. Yes, so with all of these healthier units of cavalry, this is pretty much Engsfitz rolling the dice. All of his cavalry is now in. How well can he use them? A nice charge in here to try and help the Corsairs. You can see them rapidly losing manpower in the face of the Numenorian Shield Guard, but the Adunai Lancers need to get out of there pretty quickly because the Shield Guard have got every advantage in prolonged melee, a big anti-cav bonus and an armour piercing bonus, both of which are very useful against the Adunai Lancers. Shield Guard move forward, more Corsairs in the way. You can see that Numenor have managed to get into the back lines. I think regardless of who the 85% rule applies to, it is going to be a minor victory, but that doesn't really matter because one side ultimately has to gain a major victory. And I'm not sure, I think actually Umbar have managed to rally a little bit, because for a while there their front lines looked like they were in terrible shape against the onslaught of the stronger Numenorian units. You can see over here Numenor have sort of won in this little pocket over here, but towards the coast, like I said, Umbar are winning. Umbar have got cavalry in the back lines once again. Can Numenor get themselves sort of organised quickly enough? Look at all of these Umbar riders. This was always going to be a concern, but the Pompeians going forth, charging in there, trying to deal with what's left of the Anarion Guard, another one of the Numenorian generals. One of the many Pharazons on display today with his golden pope hat. More Corsairs. I mean, this is the saving grace for Numenor, that big portions of the Umbar army at this point are made up of stuff like Corsairs, which, you know, very easy for stronger Numenorian units to finish off. There goes that general that we just saw, actually, clubbed to death by one of the Balakith shield bearers. These are Adunai Lancers. Corsair infantry also in behind enemy lines, so now the Umbar archers have got into a decent position. Not the strongest archers, of course, but it's absolutely better than nothing. Belagaea archers are in here as well. A charge coming into the rear of the Numenorian shield guard that managed to worm their way in behind enemy lines to try and get into the Umbar firing line. Ballista bolts still being traded back and forth. Over here in the middle where Numenor were doing really well at one point, and they are still doing very well, the Anarion Guard going up against the Adunai shield guard, so heavily armoured spears on both sides, but ultimately Numenor just have the numbers here. And they also have some line infantry, so they're not as subject to the spear malice problem, but I mean, can they stop the Adunai Lancers here? Mr. Sneakman's Alcarondas faithful are also roaming around the field at this point, finishing off those Alcarondas Legion. Umbar victorious next to the coast. I mean, they don't have much left from that fight, but they do at least have something, so it's going to be more for Numenor to try and deal with. Ballista crews now expending all of their bolts. They're going to move forward. Every man could count here in the late stage, but I think things have just gotten a little bit too chaotic for Numenor. Umbar always had more in the way of mobility in this battle, so this sort of fight will favour them as more gaps appear, more easy charges appear, and the Adunheim Lancers, I think they're a cavalry unit with a 15 charge bonus, so it's not as deadly as Knights or something like the Nandor Glade Riders or Tharbad Riders, but it's still enough to cause massive damage. Armour piercing as well on the charge. More Numenorian cohorts arriving to surround the surround that the Ballista crew engaged in. The Naru Rearguard now leaving the front line, which actually means, I mean, that's basically like giving up on this fight, but it looked pretty hopeless for them there anyway. All along the front line, Umbar starting to cheer in places. I think it's just gotten away from Numenor here. And it did come down to the cavalry in the end, I think. The fact that they were just able to find the gaps, and I said it would have come down to Engsvitz's cavalry control, having to use all of those units. And he did well enough, I think, to earn his team the victory here. Alasan and Mr. Sneakman holding down things on the front line, because it was more their units that engaged in the really bloody battle to start things off. And I think as well their choice of target for the Blackguards was just a little bit wiser than the Seafarers on this occasion. I think going after the other Javelin Men was the right call, at least primarily. There was obviously some variation there, but I think it was the right move. Because while Numenor did recover when the second line was committed, I think they had to commit their second line far sooner than they would have liked. And Umbar was just able to outlast them in the end, really wear them down. There are still some Numenor units in the backfield, but there's still Umbar cavalry sort of roaming around, marauding. Those Balagar archers have been caught. The Ballista crew engaged by the Corsair infantry, who of course double as light infantry. So against especially an artillery crew, they're going to be just fine. They're going to be able to clean up there. Umbar riders still. Naru and Aru Rearguard are going to be a tough target for the Umbar cavalry, to be honest, because of how good they are as spearmen. But it's now, the battle is slowing down as Numenor's resilience starts to wane, and you can see, yes, whomever it may be, whether it was the Caesarians, I think maybe it was the Caesarians getting a minor victory by killing 85% of the enemy. If that is the case, they have achieved it. But unfortunately for them, a major victory I think is going to go the way of the Pompeians here, as Umbar probably going to be too much here. Naru and Aru Rearguard still got a few missiles. There's still some very scattered remnants of units which tried to get in behind the lines. Destroyed there, that general, by an Alcarondas Legionnaire. And over here we can see some Naru and Aru Rearguard. They are actually being overwhelmed by this pocket of Numenor resistance, but it's going to take more than that. I think like 9 out of 10 fights we're seeing at this point are going the way of Umbar, especially here in the middle where there's still... Well, there goes a general. Maybe morale is the way they can do this, but the Adunheim Lancers, we've seen them time and time again, they do break, unlike their footbound Black Numenorian brethren, but with this much cavalry on display, you find it... I mean, it's going to be hard to convince me to think that Numenor still have a chance in this battle, to be honest with you. What have we here? Alcarondas Faithful still doing their thing. Looks like we've got some more Numenorians, but a downhill charge from the Adunheim Lancers. They're going to be engaged in melee by Corsair infantry as well. I mean, to be fair, they should be able to fight their way out of this, but like I said, they're going to take losses. There's still some bolts coming in as well, so they did conserve a little bit of artillery ammunition for the late game, just in case. Corsairs dragging down what little remains of the elite Numenorian unit they were fighting off against the Naru and Aru Sentinels. It's always interesting to see when a really low tier unit ends up victorious against a really high tier one. But yes indeed, I think at this point it's just going to be clean up. What have we got here? I mean, the Naru and Aru Rearguard are such a resilient unit. They may not be bodyguard tier anymore as such, but they're capable of holding on for such a long time, and of course all the while this has been going on, their fellow archers are shooting into the backs of these Numenorians, trying to be as efficient as they possibly can. few Corsairs over here, one Numenorian shield guard, units routing through the trees. I mean, just to take a look from on high, you can see where the line battle went. You could also see, basically at both sides, it curls this way, which it's a red flag you can look for when it comes to trying to win a line battle. I don't think that was the only reason they lost, but it is one of those telltale signs that things have gone slightly awry for you on the front line. But also, I think it was like as well in the middle sections of the line as well, where Javelin Men, choice of targets. There goes another general ability. But yes, I think Umbar are good value for this victory, to be honest with you. I think their decision making was just a little bit more on the money. Meanwhile, it's amazing there's still a Seafarer of Nindamos left alive, to be honest with you, considering they were among the first into the fray, both at dealing with enemy javelins and in melee. And in the end, he's lived this long only to, presumably, be finished off by a gaggle of Corsairs. Not sure if that's the official name for a group of Corsairs, but it will be from here on out. He's going to ultimately be dragged down though, even if he does get a few more kills, just like the one he got. Meanwhile, see over here again, like they're getting shot in the side by archers. They're continuing to get charged in the back by cavalry. They're engaged from the front by these Corsair infantrymen. Remains, it's not all that much. I mean, to be fair, there's not a huge amount of Umbar left either. There's only a 10% differential between the two. Fair bit of it is Cav. There's still like a section of their army, but you wouldn't say that. I mean, it is a Pyrrhic victory, certainly, which is perhaps why the Caesareans can claim a minor victory today. But I think it would have been fairly difficult for the Pompeians to win without suffering 85% losses, to be honest with you. This battle is always going to be a slaughter fest. It was always going to be very bloody for both sides, but the major victory is theirs, ultimately. More Cav coming in. They're just trying to swamp this unit of Anarion Royal Guard at this point, with cavalry, with infantry, of varying quality levels, everything. Is that the end? They seem to still be fighting something. No. Is that a general? It is a general. He's continuously getting knocked down. Surely he isn't going to live through this. It's a fairly brutal end, to be honest with you, for our Pharazon. He still lives. He refuses to go down easily. Takes a special kind of individual to wield a sword that large with just the one hand. But it's not going to save him, unfortunately. He's taking a real beating now. Sword blows raining down upon him. This is, I think, the last of the Numenorian units. Cavalry continues to come in. Can't even see him anymore, he's surrounded by so many units. Fortunately for him, I suppose, most of the units that are hitting him are designed to either be doing their damage from the charge or a lower tier light infantry. But it is ultimately that lower tier light infantry that wins. And that, I believe, is going to be that, unless there's fighting happening over here. And again, in a very similar fashion, I suppose, there is a single Numenorian fighting in and amongst all these Corsairs. Even more so on this occasion as well. Other units around him, lower tier, but there he goes. And that is that. 10% exactly the difference. And like I said, I think the difference here was just the decision making of Umbar was just a little bit better. The cavalry control was very good, I think, from Engsvitz, and I think as well the targeting of the javelins early on kind of shaped how the line battle went. And I don't think Numenor ever truly had full control over the front line, and they needed to, considering the amount of cavalry they were going to have to face down later on. So yeah, ultimately I think Umbar, aka the Pompeians, good value for this victory. Let's see what did the damage for the Numenorians though. Numenorian cohort. Royal Legion of Armenlos doing well on the front line, as you'd expect. I mean, in terms of infantry today, they were the strongest unit on the field. So in a grindy fight they did well. Numenorian Shield Guard doing well again. That AP really paying dividends against some really decent Umbar units indeed. 510 on a unit of spears is a very good return, and again 506. 310 as well is, again, the lowest was 136, which says it all really, doesn't it? And I think that was Marshal of the Guard's army. Meanwhile, Captain Anarion, he has got some Numenorian shield guard of his own, which broke 240 kills. His Alcarondas faithful did very well also at 341. Again, they were, along with the Umbar variant of the same unit, the strongest cav unit on the field, so you'd expect them to do well, but perhaps not getting as many kills as that, considering they are melee cavalry, so they're a little bit more defensive in nature. Nara and Royal Guard, they did get a decent amount of kills with their arrows, and presumably up close as well when things were sort of descending into that last stand phase where they had to just sort of fight with their backs to the wall or against one another, and they did okay at that. Alcarondas Legion as well, obviously differing fates depending on how much damage they took early, but still okay, and Seafarers all doing pretty decently considering the amount of ammunition that they have. Ballista not doing too well. These Alcarondas Legion over here were in probably the worst section of the field if they took that much damage. The Seafarers very similar though, very similar numbers for all the Seafarers I would imagine. But once again, the Nara and Royal Guard doing quite well for themselves actually in the end. And finally, I believe this is sort of the more supporting army. Yeah, Belagar Archers didn't do that well. Numenorian Cohort, however, did, as you would perhaps expect. Lots of Numenorian Cohorts, so yeah, this was the second line, this must have been Mevin. Yeah, Numenorian Cohort doing okay, actually not quite as well in many cases as those units of Numenorian Shield Guard, which is interesting. So that AP and also the anti-cavalry bonus would have helped out against all of that, all of those Adunine Lancers they were facing down. But yeah, I mean, range support, differing levels of efficiency, I would suggest. The Ballistas, I would say, did okay without being spectacular. The Archers, again, very differing fates. I think the Nara and Royal Guard did okay at range, but also in melee, they're going to be able to chip in a little bit more than Belagar Archers, which may explain some of that. So yeah, big thank you to Spirit of Thunder for sending this one in. Long may these continue, because they always make for interesting watches. And this one was probably the most simplistic, actually, of all the ones we've seen so far. And I quite liked it. Again, seeing a line battle of that size and scale is always quite interesting to see, because of course you could really see the back and forth. Initially Umbar had the upper hand, then Numenor came back with the introduction of their second line, but ultimately they didn't have the longevity, and then Umbar was able to wrestle control back, which, considering the size of that line battle, whoever came out on top of it, whether it was through help from cavalry and javelins or whether it was just through sheer martial might, whoever came out on top was always going to be in a good position to go on to win the battle, to be honest. So yeah, big thank you to him. Big thank you to all of the players for being a part of this battle. It's always nice to see. Hopefully I can join the next one. It's been a little bit of a hectic last few days, but hopefully next time I can jump in. As for what's next, I'm not sure, because again, like the time between recording sessions is a little bit longer now, because I'm going to try and start to do a bit more in terms of streaming for the Divide and Conquer campaign. So with sort of like a week between recording sessions, I don't really know what sort of replays I'm going to get. But of course, as I've been saying for the last few replays, I've sort of started to reboot essentially my my replay list from a certain date. So it sort of makes it easier to organise in my head, and this is actually the first one of that. So this is sort of like the first new replay that I've got since I sort of cleaned out the old replays, and this is a good one to start off with, I have to say. So yeah, I'm not sure what in terms of replays will be coming next, but do obviously continue to expect the Divide and Conquer streams, certainly from now until sort of mid to late September, when there will still be streams, but they probably won't be as regular as I intend to make them for the next month or so. But yeah, I think that's just about it. I think that's just about all the information that needs to be said here in the battle closing. So once again, big thank you to Spirit of Thunder. I hope that he continues to make these, because they're always very interesting. Big thanks to all the players, and I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.